now I can stop jibber jabbering and rejoice in having with us today the inimitable, astonishing Katherine May, one of the most beautiful writers working right now, and one of my very, very favorite writers of all time. I'll let her tell you more about her career, but her latest book, Enchantment, you can see she's got a copy behind her. I've got a copy here. I've got a copy on my Kindle. I've got a copy on Audible. I've got a copy in my brain. And I keep scribbling bits of it on pieces of paper because it's magnificent and everybody should go get it and read it. So I am going to get my, hang on, I have to get my document with all Catherine's quotes on it. All right. So instead of,
it's not intimidating at all.
I'm just, see, here's my plan. This is how it serves my narcissism. I'm just going to take over completely. But then I also serve myself by reading your words, which are much better than mine could be.
It's not true at all.
So first of all, I just want this to be a conversation. Usually I jabber for a few minutes and then we take questions, but today we're in a different format and I would love to just talk to you, Katherine. Is that what you go by, Katherine?
I'm a Katherine. I go for the full length of the name.
Full name, Katherine the Great. Okay. So I first read, the first book of yours that I read was The Electricity of Every Living Thing. Is that what it's called?
That's what it's called. Yeah. It once got called in a British magazine, The Electricity of Every Loving Thing, which made it sound a bit like a sex toy catalogue.
It does. There's a whole branding line you could go into now.
I could go into another business, yeah.
But it's not, now the book we're telling you to get here is Enchantment, but you must also get The Electricity of Every Living Thing, which is about Katherine taking a very multi-layered walk through the English countryside, a long, long walk, and also sort of discovering things about herself in midlife that were quite surprising. So do you mind like introducing yourself this way, just because that's how I met you?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's like the backstory. Yeah, so I learned when I was 39 that I was autistic. And that's, I mean, I did it by going on a long walk, and without the walk, I would never have realized, because I needed that time to process so many stories I've been telling myself, and to clear the way, and to make space for that new information to come through. And so that's, how old am I now? I'm coming up to 46. So I've known that for 7 years, and I can't explain the extraordinary, life-changing power of learning that about yourself when you've not known what you are for your entire life. So yeah,
and of course there's a huge spectrum, and there are people who have very severe disability based on this, but you, like, as you say in that book, nobody would have guessed. No. And I read it, I was just like, oh, I went online, I took the test. Now I turned out mildly autistic.
Okay.
But you said when you took the test, you thought it would be mild, and it was actually quite pronounced.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, the thing about nobody would have guessed was really more because nobody thought that girls were autistic at the time at all. And I mean, all the very clear signs were there throughout my childhood. I exhibited some really classic signs of autism. You know, I stopped talking for a year when I was 3. I had severe kind of sensory problems. I had all of the mental health problems that come with being autistic. It was all absolutely there, but it wasn't, the information just wasn't available. And so when I got my diagnosis, my mum said, I knew there was something.
Right. It explained my whole family to me. So it relates to this book, because when you say the electricity of every living thing, that is not metaphorical. Is that correct? That you actually can feel a charge when you touch things? Because
I mean,
we know
everything carries a current.
Right. Everything alive
Yeah.
is powered by electricity. What does it feel
Mm.
like to you?
It depends. I mean, it's kind of a good barometer for how I feel about it as
Hmm.
well, because if it's a thing that I like, the electricity can feel very friendly and a
Hmm.
lovely tingle or a gorgeous kind of flowing circuit. But
Hmm.
if it's something I'm less keen on, it can feel a lot like an electric shock. And a good example is I hate being touched by someone I don't
Hmm.
know and with no
Hmm.
warning. And if that happens to me, I can feel it burning on my skin for several hours afterwards, like there's
Wow.
an imprint left. And of course,
Fascinating.
if you're in a crowd, that's
Yeah.
happening kind of permanently.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like
One one of the reasons I'm prying like this is that I think that the audience for the gathering room, I said a couple of weeks ago that I think if we all took the test for are you a highly sensitive person, all our computers would explode because
yeah.
yeah, I tend toward that myself. And I think the people who are interested in what I'm interested in are also that way. But you
Mm.
go in this book into the uses of enchantment. Well, that's the title of another book, but it's called Enchantment: Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age. So the two things that I've been hearing from the audience of the gathering rooms over and over and over is the
Mm.
questions are freighted and loaded with fear, anxiety, and overwhelm. And you speak to that so beautifully. But knowing that you're extremely sensitive, because I think there's a vague and fuzzy line between a highly sensitive person and an autistic person. Often, I don't
I'm not
know.
sure there even is a line, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I don't
I think
know.
it's just different people preferring different language quite often. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that comes with its own interesting abilities and its own torments, but it
Mm.
also comes, I believe, with a dose of enchantment, with a
Yeah, I
tendency
think that's
toward the
right.
mystery and the magic
Mm.
of the natural world in particular.
Yeah.
And by magic, I simply mean that which we do not understand.
Yeah,
Um,
and the feeling of something being like magnetically fascinating as well, I think,
oh
when we're
yeah.
thinking about magic. Yeah.
Oh, and in this book, you go into the hierophanies. Is that the word that
Yeah, hierophany. Yeah.
talk a bit about about that because I
Mm.
found that really compelling, and I think the audience will too.
Yeah, so hierophany is a term coined by Mircea Eliade to basically describe these incursions of the sacred into the everyday world. So they're these objects or places which we imbue with sacred meaning.
Mhm.
And for the person that understands them, might not be readable to everybody, but for the person that understands them, they unpack layers and layers of sacred meaning and sacred feeling.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanted to think about what our hierophanies are, because then they're no longer the traditional hierophanies that we were maybe given when we were growing up. The churches or
Hmm.
these places that we were told were sacred, but maybe didn't always key so well with us. But I think that we're beginning to create new hierophanies now, and I think we urgently
Hmm.
need to actually.
Yeah, desperately. I love you
Mm,
talking about just the weight of a stone in your hand and the
mm,
sacredness um, of its trying to return to the earth, to gravity. So
yeah.
this book goes through the elements, earth, water, fire, and air, I believe in that
I always
order.
have to think really hard about it. Yeah.
And it's about going from the anxiety that so many gathering room people are always talking about into enchantment and almost using the susceptibility to fear and anxiety and burnout, which is a really key
Mm,
component of this book.
yeah.
Using that as um, a way to establish hierophanies in our everyday lives and through the connection with whatever parts of nature we can find.
Yeah.
Usually we start the gathering room with a little meditation. I would love to do it at the end and see how
Mm,
it feels to you, because I did it once and then everybody, I could feel it. I feel it like if people are responding to me on the computer, I feel it
you can.
as an
Yeah.
electric
Sure.
force.
Yeah.
And it is a way that energies join on this particular broadcast sometimes. So I'd love to do that later. But I
Mm,
really want to
mm,
trace um, with a few quotes that I'm going to read myself because I just want to steal them from you. They're so good.
Take
But
them,
take
take
us
them.
from anxiety and burnout into a place of art, enchantment, magic, and nature, which is actually, I'm writing a book that's about anxiety and how it's on the left side of the brain, and you have to go into the
Oh,
mystery on the right side. And so I'm taking
okay.
a sort of neurological, sociological approach to it. But Catherine's is poetic.
Perfect.
And in being poetic, it is itself, this book is itself a hierophany for sure. And then some of her prose is so beautiful that I'm just going to read it. So first, she talks about the burnout and fear of our incredible, painful, I got the wrong quote. There's the, okay, so there's something in the book about this, the intense fearfulness of our age. Could you just talk to us about
Oh,
that?
yeah. Yeah, I kind of compare us to rabbits in this
That's
time in
it.
our life, and this
So
idea
many
that,
predators.
yeah, that we've been running like rabbits, and you know, rabbits have this white tail that flashes to signal the next person to run behind them, and we've got stuck in this cycle of signaling fear,
Yes.
and we do that over the internet all the time, like endlessly, and each one of us is picking this fear up and passing the fear on to the next person, and I said, like, we're in the business of running now. We're just
Yes.
constantly running away from this world that seems so terrifying to us right now.
Yeah. And that actually is, an interesting neurological phenomenon where when you get stuck in
Mm,
a certain part of the brain, it just escalates anxiety without
yeah.
ever bringing it down. And so it is like we're continuously surrounded by predators and having a flight response, and it
Mm,
never goes away. Now, in the electricity of every living thing, didn't you say that 100 years ago, even if you were born with autism, there
mm,
wouldn't be this level of clamor, there wouldn't be this level
yeah,
of constant
absolutely. Yeah.
barrage of information and sensation and
Mm.
intensity? Do you think that
Yeah, I mean,
adds to the anxiety?
I really do. I begin to think that we're living in a kind of neuro-hostile age almost, that
Yes. Ah,
the level
so
of input we're receiving all the time is so great and so innovating, and even when we're enjoying it, it's tiring us.
yeah,
And you know what, like, autistic people like me are the pit canaries in this. We're the early signal that it's got
yeah,
too uncomfortable, because I now think that the neurotypical world is really understanding what we've been talking about for a long time, which is that contemporary life is unbearable,
yes,
and people are exhausted, not because they've been doing anything wrong or necessarily even overworking or you know, like burning the candle at both ends. They're exhausted because they're constantly processing so
yeah,
many inputs, and it's so
yeah,
noisy,
yeah,
and one of those inputs is fear, which is absolutely exhausting, and it never gets spent out either. So our bodies are primed for this event that never quite happens. It's endlessly deferred, and it's toxic to us, I think.
yeah. I think so, and it consumes us, and
Mm,
that's what I did bring here is a quotation about what how that happens, how that burns you out over time. So Catherine writes, I know that I am on first name terms with burning, with blazing high and burning out. Here I am back in that cycle of fuel conflagration, of scorched earth. The loss that it brings, the complete collapse of self, is always agonizing. But there's something I secretly like about it too. After all, the bare ground invites a new kindling. To have nothing to lose, you first have to lose everything.
mm,
So even though this fear is consuming us, when I read that which comes later in the book, I thought, okay, it could be that we're being set on fire for good reason.
yeah. I
It
interviewed Lama Rod Owens for my podcast
really,
a couple of months ago, and he crystallized that thought for me, because he's, you know, I said, this feels like the end times, and he said, it is.
hmm,
It's the end of something, and it's of something that we all know is going wrong.
yeah,
He said the pain is letting it burn down and
mm,
coming through into that next stage. And he said, you know, there will be suffering from that,
yeah,
but we know as a community that we also want that era to pass and for a new one to come in. And I think that really made a lot of sense to me, because we're feeling those flames. Yeah, he described it
Yeah.
as an apocalypse.
Yeah. Yeah, it
And
is.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
loved how you, for example, you also addressed in this book going during the pandemic to Zoom meetings that had to do with the consciousness of racial oppression. And
yeah, yeah.
speaking of burning, of the intense anxiety of, that creates, and the desire to go
Mm,
away from it, but then ultimately you started leaning into it. And it was as though you were like, let's burn this down. Let's burn this down. Only we can avoid it individually, but when we get together and we start to see the parameters of what we've done to each other, if
mm,
we can sit in that,
yeah.
one Buddhist nun I love says, if we can sit in the falling apartness without polarizing, it creates the ground for something completely fresh.
Mm,
So I was thinking about
I think
how
that's, yeah,
there are
yeah, it's
fire-based
powerful.
ecosystems. There are trees
Yes,
in California
absolutely. That
that,
require burning, and
yeah,
there
they
are
have to be
traditional
burned.
ways of, yeah, that's right. And there are very traditional ways of life that involve burning the ground at the end of every season to
Hmm.
make space for the new growth.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I in lots of ways I'm kind of comfortable with the burning. I'm comfortable with everything falling apart, because it's a release, and it
Yes.
requires surrender. But of
Mm,
course it does require a kind of trust that there is another life after that. And I think
yes.
that's what people really struggle with, that they have to endure the burning before they can see what the next life is.
Yeah.
And that's the terror, isn't it? I think that we
Yeah.
don't trust life to make itself again, and of course it
Yeah.
does.
And it's interesting. That's a more existential fear. It's a deeper fear than all the
Mm,
clamor around us. But when we decide to turn away from the clamor and we start to feel ourselves burning, then there's a
mm,
deeper fear. But it seems to me to be a more authentic fear, because it really,
yeah.
the
But it's
burning of the,
existential, isn't it? It's
yeah, the burning of
absolutely,
the ego.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
to me, there's a deep spirituality in the way you talk about that, that is not at all religious, which really appeals to me. And one of my favorite passages, all right, this one I have read to everyone I know, because I've been meditating for years and years. It's wonderful. But I also
Mm.
had a bunch of children, and I was a professor for a while, like you. I had to go through my degree program while I had 3 kids. And so you
Oof.
write, yeah, you write about meditating and how it would be great to be one of those amazing, heroic people who go off to a cave for 12 years. But you're also a working mother, a working parent.
Yeah, yeah.
And so here's a long piece, but I'm going to read this because I just loved it so much. Few of the wise souls who have devoted years to contemplating the structure of the cosmos could tell us how to practice in circumstances like this, like the ones you were living in. I want them to come and learn what I know too, and what many other patient souls could share. I want them to experience the discipline of forever being pulled away from the interior, always feeling that the work of the mind and the body is just out of reach. They would have to live through the exhaustion and the frustration and the isolation, and choose to wholeheartedly give care over and over again rather than walk away. I want them to strive to attain the mental and physical discipline of getting out of bed in the middle of the night and still finding gentleness rather than fury. I want them to understand that they know nothing until they have endured endless spiritual deferment, the balm of contemplation, forever at one remove. Oh,
I think that was
ah.
one of my more rebellious
But what you're
thoughts.
doing here is you're burning patriarchy, and you're burning it for anyone who wants to be a participating caregiver, because the whole economic structure takes us away from care, and spiritual structures follow it.
The patriarchal structure no longer acknowledges how care is even going to take place. I mean, I think there was I grew up in an era when women were expected to stay home and give care. we're no longer even expected to do that. We are now obliged for both members of a couple to work, because otherwise no one can afford to live.
Yep.
And sorry, who is looking after the children or the elderly parents or the sick people? Like, we haven't got a plan. And yet we are endlessly told that those of us who are giving care and who go back and do it again and again are somehow like it's spiritually and intellectually inadequate. And I mean, wow, that's a burning that really needs to happen. And that actually speaks to your point of like a burning as a spiritual gateway. You know, when we burn this down, we open up this space in which we can honor the fullness of our wisdom and existence and knowledge, and be there with no shame, you know, to take ourselves into that space and fully inhabit it. And I get quite excited by the burn.
Me too. Right now we have in my most intimate circle a 2-year-old who's going through a big tantrumy developmental stage, and a beloved matriarch who is literally passing away right now. There's a deathbed watch. And to take time away from all the stuff we're supposed to do in this culture, all the stuff that is considered worthwhile, and to be there at those incredibly crucial moments of human caring is itself a burning. And I think what you were saying to me, to all of us out there who are resonating with this, is if you've been doing that, you've been doing spiritual practice. It doesn't matter if you meditate. If you've been doing that, if you feed your cat every day, that's spiritual practice.
I'd go further. I'd say it's spiritual leadership. You know, like what we show to our children when we bring gentleness to them instead of force is a sort of an opening of a pathway for their future life too. And that's exponential. That's how we pass it on. Absolutely. It's so vital and so undervalued.
So there's that, and that's brilliant in this. Well, it's brilliant in all your work, but there's another way as well. Like there's the burning of the spiritual leader who's trying to exist in a materialistic society, but there's also the mystery, the enchantment, the art that you bring in, and you talk about how your art sort of punched its way through your resistance. And I just wanted, these are shorter, but you wrote, writing kept coming back to me, punching its way out of whatever grave I dug it. It loomed insistent at my window. It rattled my door. I just couldn't kill it. There was no silver bullet, no stake, no incantation that would slay it. Writing had plans for me, and my resistance was futile. Oh, I know there are people out there just taking a huge deep breath. Because something's got plans for them too, for all of us.
I mean, it speaks really strongly to your work, I think, that bit, but it is this sense of, you know, I was denying my integrity there completely. I was deliberately trying to squash down the thing that I knew was my absolute life's mission, and I thought it was silly and embarrassing and not a good enough goal, not a certain enough goal, not a serious enough goal. And I did everything I could to not be a writer for the longest time. And then by the time I realized that I had to be a writer, I'd got really bad at writing. I hadn't taken care of it. You know, I'd been a good writer as a child, but that did not convert into me being a good writer as an adult once I'd taken 10 years off of it. And so I had to absolutely learn to fail at being a writer before I became a decent one.
Can I read one more quote, and then I want to talk more about this? I've been going through this because of when I in my own research realized I needed to go into my right brain, I tried to reclaim my own childhood art, which was visual, drawing and painting. So I've been doing, and I had much the same experience. And this paragraph, whatever it is you do, last week I talked about how the new neurological research shows that participating in the arts, whatever your art is, changes your brain in ways that are very felicitous, very healthy, and your whole biochemistry changes. But this is what it takes to do that in a culture that does not value it. Katherine writes, the skills of deep play, which is where art comes out, took far longer to learn than anything I'd studied before. They meant asserting the awkward right to time, space, and solitude, making a shameful claim on my own creativity. They meant learning to trust my long-forgotten gut instinct and to feel a yearning for my own work. They meant putting aside time to do things that seemed pointless to the outside world. They meant confronting my stultifying terror of failure and learning to enjoy eviscerating mediocre, mistake-ridden work. It was long and slow and uncertain and quite often boring. And then you say
Yeah.
it was all worth it. And let me tell you, to read Katherine May on the page is to feel a really holy gratitude that she did this, that you did this. Thank you, Katherine.
I
Because
couldn't
what you
not. I couldn't not.
couldn't not, and yet you've been so brave and so persistent, and you have such a high standard, not only for your art, but for the soul of it and for the magic of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I know that everyone out there listening to this is starving for that. I think the world is starving for it.
The people that talk to me about their writing, 9 times out of 10 say to me, like the question comes down to, am I actually allowed to do this? And that
Yes.
can get phrased in loads of different ways. It can be, why are you allowed to do this?
Mm.
Or it can be, oh, how do I deserve the time? How do I make the time? Or it can be, when do I do, and all of those questions are basically the same thing, which is,
Yeah.
am I entitled to this thing that drives me?
Yeah.
And the answer is always like, yes, right now. Like,
Yeah.
right now is the time that you do it. And also, you've got to be ready for it to take a long time, but you
Yeah.
start that commitment right away. And it will be painful. I mean, I think that's the that's the dark side of having a practice like this, is that you have to go in and kind of, it is like going into like the deepest, most painful therapy, because you
Mm-hmm.
will confront every difficult part of yourself in the
Yeah.
process of making the work that you are desperate to make. And
Yeah.
you have to go in facing that uncertainty of the new life as well, and knowing that it you might never become the thing that you're envisaging right now, because you just don't know where it's going to lead
You
you,
don't know.
but it will
Yeah.
lead you somewhere.
So ultimately, this is a book about faith, about fear
Mm,
and faith, and about the transformation of the world, through the transformation of individual human consciousness, which then extends itself in incredible artistic work like this book, and it becomes a shared possession that we can
mm.
I hang on to this book like an island that I've found on a long swim, right? Like, because when you read it, it is self-evidently true. That's the thing about great poetry, and you are a poet, even though you write prose for
Yeah, I
these books,
started as a poet. Yeah.
and it lands in the soul, and it is irrefutable. It just
Mm,
clicks into place, and your whole body and mind and spirit know it's true. And that's the state of integrity. You write from there, and you challenge culture from there, and you challenge our everyday demons, and you find the angels, you find the hierophanies everywhere, and
oh, well,
show them
thank
to
you.
us.
That's
So
such a
now
generous way of putting it. Thank you. And
your work is
I
phenomenal. I just am so grateful for it. So now, usually I can see people's comments. I can't see anybody out there right now, but I still want to do a final meditation, uh, and just introduce you to this one, Katherine. And it comes from a neurologist at Princeton, but it's an odd exercise that they show puts the brain into a really interesting space. And speaking of space, that's what it focuses on. Most of our physical matter is made up of space. So your atoms are full of space. And if you turn your attention from the matter in you to the space, and from the sound to the silence, and from the motion to the stillness, it shifts the brain. So this is how I lead the meditation. It's, you have to start with a question. And the question is, can I imagine the space in the distance between my eyes? Can I imagine the space in the tissue inside my chest? Can I imagine the silence beneath everything I'm hearing? Can I imagine the stillness that holds everything that's moving? Ooh. That changes my electricity when we do this meditation. And thank you for participating in it. It is a way into it is way onto holy ground. And another way onto holy ground, all of you, is Katherine May's work. I just want to thank you one more time and say, please keep writing. We need you. The world needs you. And
thank you so much.
It's such an honor to have welcomed you here on the Gathering Room. I hope we meet again soon.
It's an absolute honor to be here. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Katherine. Bye, everybody. See you next week on the Gathering Room.